Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
And hello, Usama.
Hello, Rami. It's
So,
been a couple of weeks since we had the chance to do this together, so hopefully this one's going to be an interesting one.
yeah, we've been missing you.
Thank you. I've missed being here.
Oh, yeah? So, let's recap for everyone where we're at now. This is the 10th episode of Deconstructing Islam, the 5th episode of a mini series on how to de-indoctrinate. The first two episodes, and it will make sense if you're going to watch this and get a lot out of it to watch those first two episodes. In the first two episodes, we give a little general description of what people's problem is in the first place, and a little bit about kind of the solution, epistemology. We talk about journaling. We talk about therapy. We don't get into too much details. This episode is to try to get into the details, although it's still summary format in the way I see it, of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And there's many ways to describe that. Usama has other ways to describe it. I just picked one. The subject goes back to at least 2,500 years, maybe older. And I have my own slides that I made. Usama has his own slides also. And one way I'll say this to everyone, every scientist has his own conception of what the scientific approach is. It might be a little bit different in what we stress, although I think they really should be all the same. So that means any contradictions between us, one of us is right or both of us is wrong. There'll be some better version later. Some third guy later is going to have a better slideshow. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that the fact that when we're talking about knowledge as such, it's a topic that has been mainly the purview of philosophy. And because of that, you still see that people propose ways of understanding knowledge, come up with philosophies that have systems that try to propose a way of how knowledge is acquired, how it's implemented, how it connects with everyday life. And for that reason, it's mainly a debate rather than a presentation of already established truths that we're just imparting on people. However, even though it is an ongoing project, we have to acknowledge that there are enterprises that have relied on certain paradigms, including science. And one of the things that I think both of us are hoping to present is what can we learn from that successful enterprise, and can we actually transfer some of that knowledge into other areas of inquiry that are not directly scientific but that could benefit from that same methodology and its success. Of
And I
course.
would still say it differently than Usama did just now. But I don't want to get into it yet. We're going to get into those details when we start talking about these things. Okay, so I say we get started here. Oh no, where did it go? Let's see. There it is. So I just had this. I'm going to have one slide for me. It's just one slide, and we're going to read a little bit and mostly just talk. And I just broke it up into 8 things. Maybe it would have been better with 12 or 6. We'll see.
Well, how about we do it this way then?
Sure.
Since you do have these already set up in this way, let's make it as the basis. Because I think if both of us are going to be showing the whole thing, it's not going to fit within the
Well, I
allotted.
think it would end up being 2 episodes maybe. And I noticed your format is a different style than mine. You're presenting it as sort of the chronological history of when we figured these things out, what question we had, and the developments, if I understand correctly. And
To
mine,
some
I'm not
extent.
really doing that.
To some extent, there was an attempt obviously to make this a unified approach. Since we have been talking about Popper and Deutsch, I emphasize on these two, but obviously they are by no means the only two people who worked on this.
Right. Okay. So if we're gonna have numbered principles here, principle number 1, fallibility. So it means we can't reach perfection. It means there's always flaws in our knowledge. It means even when we sort of, let's say we get lucky and we have something that's right, and suppose a portion of it doesn't have flaws, we wouldn't even know that we reached that state. Because we don't have a method of guaranteeing that we don't have a flaw somewhere. Because the only way you know you have a flaw is when you're in a future state and you're looking in the past saying, oh, look at that flaw we saw. But in the moment, in the present, you didn't have the knowledge to even see it yet. It's a matter of, you hear these two phrases. I know what I don't know. And then there's the I don't even know what I don't know. Mm-hmm. Two levels. And, when you're a child, you reach the first level of, oh, there's stuff I don't know, or there's stuff my parents don't know. And then there's the person themselves doesn't even know what they're not aware of. And I think that if you think of two spheres or three spheres, what I know I don't know, and then a third one, what I don't know. The third one is the biggest one. At least where we are today, maybe a million years in the future is different. But according to David Deutsch, the way he explains it, we're always at the beginning of infinity. Mm-hmm. So that third sphere keeps getting bigger.
Yeah, if I may make a connection between this type of knowledge and the religious knowledge, and
yes, please do that. Yes,
how that would then connect, because if you're thinking about having God as the source of your knowledge, then this means that you have gone to the head, to the wellspring of where this whole thing comes from. And so when religious people or religious texts are making pronouncements of anything, whether it's about the world, whether about how we're supposed to live our lives, they are making a claim that since this is coming from God, it's infallible. And so that infallibility, that rigidity that's going to result from this is exactly the antithesis of what you just mentioned about being at the beginning of infinity at all times. Because if you already have that knowledge, then you're not supposed to progress any further.
This has some symptoms. Mm-hmm. There's some symptoms that come along with this belief you're describing. For one thing, you think you already have the answers, so you're not searching for answers.
Yeah.
And since you already think you have the answers, you must assume your questions that you're asking are also the correct ones.
Yeah, I can actually bring a quote that's attributed to Umar ibn Khattab, the caliph. Although it's probably apocryphal, but it actually does convey the spirit of what's happening here. So supposedly when Umar's envoys occupied Egypt and they reached the remnants of Alexandria's big public library, they sent to him, what are we to do with these books? He said, if they coincide with what we have, then it means that they are useless. If they disagree with what we have, then they are harmful. So this means that we're not going to be expanding the knowledge beyond that. And supposedly he ordered the remnants to be disposed of.
And here's the problem with that, or a problem with it. And maybe this will come up in the next points. I don't know. It's just popping up in my head now. When you have a scenario where you think your knowledge is like the perfect knowledge, what it means is, well, some of that knowledge is good and there's some flaws, and whatever flaws there are will be preserved and cannot be improved on. Where in the other scenario where we say, look, all our knowledge is already flawed. We know it's flawed. We're just trying to improve on our current knowledge. And we know we're going to arrive at another set of knowledge that is still flawed, but it's less flawed than before. We keep getting better. We are progressing. Mm-hmm. So whatever evils we have today won't be the same evils as tomorrow. It'll be less evil tomorrow.
Yeah. And that actually connects with the concept of doubt, which scares the hell out of many believers. Some belief systems actually did manage to embrace it in a way. So you can see some Christians that would say that doubt is a way to actually reaffirm your knowledge and so on. But
The
eventually,
Islamic way, it says doubt is bad.
if you're
Is that
doubting,
all of it, all the factions, or is there any variation of Islam or was there ever a point in history where that wasn't a settled question yet?
I'm not going to pretend to have encompassed that history, but I think the Mu'tazilites, who were a little bit more rational in their approach to religion, they might have valued doubt in some way.
Did they argue it from the Quran or from the Hadith at least?
They based everything that they had on the Quran. They rejected some ideas that might have been less rational, but at the same time they ended up.
Well, then let me just ask you about the Quran then. Is it more than one place, or is it a ton of places where it says doubt is bad?
Well, I can actually come up with a story that might that's from the Quran, that might show that this conception, the Islamic conception of doubt, is not really as bad as Muslims conceive of it. So there's a story of Abraham, who is supposed to be one of the people who showed or exhibited a form of unwavering belief. He was about to kill his son. And yet there is this passage that quotes him doubting God while talking to God. So in a way, asking him, show me so that my heart is more secure, or
so it sounds like whoever made the Quran, wrote it, whatever, recognized there needs to be some version of doubt God, but then in general shat on it.
Probably the people who wrote the Quran, whoever they are not the same people who eventually elaborated on this and created the Islamic doctrine that is against doubt to begin with. You have
what I've been learning recently is a lot of the things that I thought is central to Islam, in the sense that it started with it, were things that actually were questions not settled till centuries later.
Absolutely. The Quran is a very ambiguous
like for example, the issue of the last prophet.
Yeah.
That I heard wasn't a settled question, and Shi'is and Sunnis were disagreeing about it for centuries, and today they agree it's a settled question.
If you open any book on exegesis, interpretation, commentary on the Quran, almost on all pages you will see that the people of the learned people have disagreed on this issue. That's almost on every single page. So there is no such thing as a
settled question.
Yeah. So you have all sorts of interpretations for.
Well, aren't they at least settled that there's a God named Allah?
Well, I guess, but even then, the
God, features of Allah they don't agree on, right?
Yeah, the features. So
which means they're not agreeing.
The Mu'tazilites.
It's a different thing if you change out features.
Yeah. So there was a huge debate and even fighting about whether God is an entity that has features or not, like a hand, a leg, and so on. So it's.
So this brings us to our next thing, optimism. I think you were expressing, when you were talking about doubt, what's also in there, the people that are doubting, and I mean the bad way, because to be clear, in science, in the scientific approach, doubt is good. We don't see it as a bad thing. Doubt is a very good thing. It's healthy. It's like the right way. Doubt is how you find an error, by doubting something first. Now, it doesn't mean unlimited doubt where you don't make decisions. That's not what it is. People do get confused by that when we talk about doubt. But anyway, if you have the wrong conception of doubt, I can see you being pessimistic. We can't get the knowledge we want. Or I can't do better than what we're already doing. Or I can't do better than God. That's another one, right? Like, and I guess if you believe in God, and I mean the variation of God and a variation of how you think about God, where you say, well, God chose everything, and this came up in one of the helping episodes where I helped someone.
Mm-hmm.
He presented with nihilism, is the way he said it. And when I asked for details of what that is, because different people have different conceptions of what that is even. And he said he wants, this is after some clarification, he wants cosmic justice, but no longer believes in cosmic justice. And I discovered something while talking with him, that the people, and I'm not saying necessarily everyone, because you can be mixed. You can care about cosmic justice while also understanding and caring about earth justice. But there are a lot of people who they focus on the cosmic justice, so they don't even try for earth justice.
Yeah.
And I want to be very specific here, because I'm sort of saying something vague. There's people who, they have some sort of problem, and then they'll just pray to God to change the environment around them so the problem disappears, rather than them taking action to do something about it, to fix it. Or you can say it another way. They think the correct course of action is to pray to God, so then God does it.
Yeah, that connects with a very common stream in Islam that's very fatalistic. And that's actually one of the debates included within the debates that I just mentioned, that they think, is God giving us the ability to act, or since many places in the Quran it says that everything has been determined and he is the only arbiter and judge of what's happening.
You just said the word determined, and I figured it out right before you said it. It's the issue between free will and fate, as opposing. You either have free will or there's fate. You can either change things or it's being decided for us by God. And it's the same kind of problems. I guess if we said this earlier, you don't have to believe in God to have this problem. You could be somebody that just believes, all right, I'm not capable to change anything, and other people are. And then they ask themselves, they ask other people, what's going to happen in the world? What's going to happen in the future? They're seeing it as, what is everyone else going to do? Because I can't do anything. I'm incapable of changing anything, but I want to know what other people are going to be doing to change things.
Yeah. And connecting to the idea of doubt, and how from my experience, how believers very often view the progress that's happening in science, and the progress that where it sometimes gets stymied and doesn't actually progress beyond a certain point. Since they believe that they have this infallible knowledge, and they think, well, it seems that the scientific method advocates for continuous changes in the scientific knowledge. There is no such thing as a scientific solid knowledge, and therefore doubt. True. Yeah, which is true, but it's true.
They see it as bad and as a flaw in itself.
Yeah, it's true, but with an asterisk, because they are actually there is a very common embrace of that postmodernist view that there's no such thing as an actual progress in knowledge, that everything is.
That's a different issue. Yes.
Yeah.
They're saying there's no progress. We're not saying that. There is progress.
So what they're saying is that if you allow for doubt, then this means that any knowledge that you have right now is not solid knowledge. But on the other hand, we have access to the creator of the world. We have this infallible source of knowledge, and therefore doubt, if it's ever going to creep into our beliefs, we should try to quench it and get rid of it as much as possible.
Which all it does is instantiate the current flaws.
Yeah.
While on the other side, we are allowing ourselves to make progress on our flaws.
Yeah. The lack of they view the presence of doubt as the lack of confidence, and the lack of standing on a stable ground.
And here's the problem. This presents a different issue. that we've talked about before. We talked about how there's scientists who are trained, in science, and then there's scientists who are also trained in how to speak to other people.
Yeah.
And it's these people that we're talking about, that if they think doubt doesn't go with confidence, they don't realize that, like, when they see, a lot of people see a scientist and they say, and I mean the outsiders, they will say, oh, look, he's cocky, or he's very confident. But no, he's probably doubting things way more than everyone else.
Yeah.
That's actually how we gain the confidence, is after so much goddamn doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things that is really hard to change in the conception of promoting doubt as a positive thing is this very idea that you're actually trying to look for truth. If you think that you have truth, then that reaches that point of stagnation, and that's going to prevent you from trying to seek to improve what you have, because you no matter what you think about what you have, even if you think that there's something wrong with it, if you think that its source is divine, you're just going to stop at that point, and you're not going to try to doubt, you're not going to try to improve on it, you're not going to do anything about it. And so when it comes to people who are in that in-between stage where they have left the faith, but they still haven't actually fully deconverted, they're probably going to be the people most vulnerable and the people most looking into this issue. Am I supposed to doubt? Do I have the right to doubt or not? What is it that I'm supposed to doubt? Everything? Does that mean that I'm going to be completely deconstructing my whole worldview? And so you end up with people saying things like nihilism is the only thing that's going to sustain them, or the abyss rather that's going to be in front of them, because they no longer have that certainty.
So I gotta say, we neglected to actually mention what principle number 2 is. Optimism. I implied it. We've implied it. It's optimism. David Deutsch uses this phraseology. He says the principle of optimism is, and the way he describes it is, it's not a generic, and I think there's an irrational version of optimism. Things are going to get better. It's not that. It's the fact that things can get better, and we have the capacity to do it. All problems are soluble, and the only limit we have is we can't break the laws of nature. And I mean the actual laws of nature, not what our current theories about nature are, which are just approximations, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think actually that's one of the really wonderful insights that David Deutsch brings into this discussion, that if you have a problem, it means that it actually followed certain laws, certain rules that are specific to that system. If you have rules that led to this problem, then these very same rules can be used in order to solve the problem.
You can also change the rules.
Well, it depends on whether you're actually hitting the wall of laws of nature. Then you cannot.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I thought you were saying was, there are rules in the sense that they were there before we existed. Like my parents had rules before I was born, and the society had rules before they were born, and a lot of these rules are not questioned. I mean, that's what being a Muslim is in the first place.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean, an entire rule set that wasn't questioned, you can change the rules. And regarding nature itself, we don't actually know what the rules are. So sometimes we could just be wrong because we have the wrong rules.
Yes. Yeah.
So as an example for people who think maybe we're crazy now, we both have a physics background, okay? He has a PhD. I have a bachelor's degree. A basic concept is, we had Newton's understanding of gravity, and then we had Einstein's understanding of gravity. Yeah. It was a supplanting of the old. Well, what's the good word for it? Starts with a P. Paradigm, right? Yeah. And the same thing happens with all sorts of other. Now here's the thing. Newton thought those were the rules. I don't know if Newton recognized basic stuff like his stuff is just an approximation and it's going to be improved on in the future. I don't know. Did he? Do you know?
I doubt that he had that conception.
So you think he thought this might be the end regarding these issues, at least?
At least these issues, yeah. I'm not a historian of science.
He did believe in God, And he came up with these amazing things just in his 20s and 30s. And then from his late 30s all the way to 80 something, he was looking at the Bible.
Bible and really esoteric aspects of the Bible. So a mix of
like looking at numbers and trying to see if there's matching numbers or something.
Yeah, it's bizarre that most of his time was actually not dedicated to doing physics.
Well, the beginning part was amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess he wrote that would give you a mental high for sure, right? A mental orgasm, what he was going through, okay? And then maybe that he read that orgasm for 50 years. Just doing, I don't know what the hell he was doing, man. It's really weird. Okay, let's move on. Principle number 3. Again, this is just my choice of where to put things. Maybe this should have been the number 1 thing. I don't know. This is actually the first thing I learned in my lifetime, chronological history of scientific thinking. It's that there are contradictions and how to find contradictions and what do you do when there is a contradiction. And I remember just okay, in math class, right? When you're checking your math work to see if you did something wrong, you're looking for a contradiction.
Yeah.
You know? And then when for you to say your answer is right is because there's no contradiction. You know? And later in my life, I'm really good at discovering somebody's lie. Okay. Now I'm not saying I didn't get fooled by con men. There's been plenty of that. But I'm in general good at finding how somebody is lying. But and if anyone was to ask me how I do it, well, I see a contradiction and now I'm trying to root it out. That's it. I think it's the same thing I did when I was doing it in math class.
Right. And when it comes to religious thinking, there's going to be a point where you could be arguing with someone who sounds very sane and rational, bringing up what seems to be logical and well thought out ideas, until you hit the unshakable principles that the faith is based on. In that case, you can actually start seeing the contradictions. And the problem is, since then, they're actually trying to defend something very irrational, something that is so fraught with contradictions that it should demolish on its own. Instead, you're going to start seeing them come up with all sorts of mental gymnastics, ways to try to protect whatever it is that's hiding that contradiction, and to come up with all sorts of justifications.
These people that are doing it, do you think that they are consciously saying the word contradiction in their head and consciously saying?
No. I honestly don't think that people who do this kind of thing realize that there is a contradiction.
They never learned the whole epistemology of contradictions.
Oh no, that's not necessarily the case. What I'm saying is that they are so trained to suspend their ability to see that particular contradiction and view it as an unshakable truth that must be reconciled with other things. Let me give you an example. Muslims are so easy to come up with the fact that when you're looking at the Trinity, you cannot have 3 gods in one. Okay, so they think that that's a contradiction. You're either talking about one God,
I know what they're doing,
or you're talking about And yet, when it comes to Christians, you can see all sorts of mental gymnastics that try to exactly defend that same point.
Let me say it a different way for everybody. They put things in categories. We literally do that. Okay, I have an idea. I have categories for it. Okay, what they'll do is, if it's in a different category, it's not a contradiction. But then they're not very good at choosing categories, and they also have some confirmation bias in saying, no, that's a different thing because it's a different category, so they don't contradict. I used to do plenty of that too. So I guess you need a little bit more than just an understanding of category of non-contradiction.
That is actually very important. But I think one of the ways that could empower a person to implement this in a real situation is to see certain things that they thought was true, incontrovertible, and yet see it deconstructed in front of their eyes. Like assuming that, for example, something that was thought to be miraculous and something that cannot be explained by science, if you're able to show that, well, if you think about it this way, you have this phenomenon that underlies this, and this is what explains it, which is actually pretty much similar to how a magician might explain the trick that they were doing and explain.
And to be clear to everyone, there's no magic. A magician is doing tricks, and he can explain it to you afterwards.
Exactly. So that sleight of hand that they were doing, which came across initially as magic, the same way that if you were to take right now a cell phone to a tribe in the Amazon that has never seen anything like that, it's just going to appear like magic to them, like a miracle, something that is not supposed to happen, and yet it is there. Once you're able to explain the principles to them, but then that's the whole trip of going from not understanding that this is a miracle to understanding fully the principles on which this was designed and based. Then it's that whole journey that connects the 2 points that would make them see the issue that they had with their original position.
So let me explain the point of the non-contradiction concept. So reality, nature, doesn't have contradictions. It can't have contradictions. That doesn't even make sense. So if we see a contradiction, that means there's a flaw in our knowledge about reality.
Yeah.
It could be a flaw between our knowledge, or a different kind of flaw where, and actually this is like a main way of non-contradiction in science. The scientific method everyone always knows is the 2 steps. You make a hypothesis, then you do an experiment. And the point is, the hypothesis or the theory or your interpretation of it makes a prediction about what would happen, and you make an experiment to see if it actually happens. And if it doesn't, that's a contradiction, and it implies that the theory is wrong. And here's what's funny. I got to explain. Sometimes people get confused even about how to decide what to do after the implication. What does it imply exactly? There's a show, History Channel, that was talking about the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and they said the sentence. Oh, let me first explain. They built a computer model of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and in the computer model, when they would set it at the leaning angle of the actual real building, it would fall in the computer model. So then they said, the speaker said, the building literally defies the laws of physics. Okay? But that's not the way it goes. What you say is the theory, being the computer model, is the thing that's wrong, not nature.
I mean, I cannot be certain, but I have actually heard someone say that this inclination in that tower might have been intentional, but I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, the assumptions that would be made in that type of model would not be taking into account maybe things about the soil in which the tower is there.
Oh, there's a billion variables it doesn't have.
Yeah, so many different things that you can.
Such a shallow description of reality.
Yeah. So it's actually disgraceful that someone might say that this is something that defies the law.
And I remember complaining about the History Channel, saying, "What is this shit?" The History Channel saying this. Actually, I think it was Discovery Channel. But both of them are supposed to be like scientific, and that's not a scientific statement.
Well, I can quibble a little bit about having something like Ancient Aliens, which has been showing on the History Channel forever, and the basis on which it is relying. Is that something that can be considered?
Well, look, the guy who said the statement and approved it, maybe they know it's bullshit or they don't, but it definitely sounds good for marketing purposes.
Oh yeah, it's I think in that case, when you're trying to present a kind of a sensational idea and you want to use hyperbolic language, you might rely on this. But if there's a scientific advisor writing with them, they should say you should never ever say something like
And
that.
he should quit that job.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
All right. Next thing. This one might be big on its own. So I just titled it Socratic Method. That's Socrates. I'm going to explain the method real quick without reading here, and then I'm going to get to what I wrote. The first time I experienced it was 5th grade, I think, and it was like history class or something. And the teacher asked a question about some historical issue, and she asked a question for us to answer, and we tried to answer. We argued with each other. She asked more questions to help us develop our answer, and she didn't answer the question.
Yeah,
that wasn't the purpose. It's a learning exercise. So this is the Socratic method. Another way to describe it, I've heard it described like this: a negative process of hypothesis generation and elimination.
Yeah.
And that's that's the scientific method that people know. Make a hypothesis and then eliminate it with an experiment.
Yeah. So from my own experience in teaching, there's a mix of reactions that you get from the students when the Socratic method is implemented in this particular way. The first one is a great sense of satisfaction through the actual process, because this usually takes on the setting of debates where you have some ideas that are being tossed back and forth, different implementations of what's supposed to be a law or an idea. But the other one is also a sense of frustration that neither the teacher nor the facilitators, the teaching assistants, are actually providing real answers, real concrete answers that would satisfy them. And that in itself is going to leave the student with a lingering sense of pursuing that particular question further beyond just this particular setting where they had the debate. And so it's actually a really powerful method because it's just forcing you to keep re-examining that particular idea and trying to think of different angles, because you don't have that authority that gave you that answer that would give
How do
you
you
that
know you're right?
Yeah, because when you provide them an answer for something, there's a sense of relief. Oh, that teacher, that authority has provided that particular answer, and that's the end of it.
Now I can stop thinking.
But if you don't provide an answer, if you just give hints, if you talk to them, that actually in itself is a if you want to think about something that would be self-motivating to think, that's a really powerful way of doing it.
Okay, so what I write here right after the Socratic method is a few words, and one that I've already explained is I explained the process as you ask a question and then there's answers. You see, question is the third one, is the second one there. Mm-hmm. But there's another way to look at. There's many ways to look at it, and they're all the same thing, just using different words, different frameworks. Another way to look at it is a goal, and there's also multiple goals. You can see the Socratic method. The main goal is help the person learn how to think.
Yeah. Where
you can see the opposite version of this, the bad kind of teaching, the old style of teaching before the Socratic way. And it's much older than the Socratic way. I'm sure centuries of this way was done before Socrates came. Otherwise, I don't think Socrates.
If I may add, Socrates didn't actually effect a revolution that stuck after him. If you look at so many people, all the generations that intervened between after Aristotle.
Well, I blame Aristotle then.
Yeah. they know about the Socratic method, but they actually never implement it, especially in contexts where you are doubting knowledge. Because remember, after all, Socrates was killed because exactly of that same thing. So his presence was actually a kind of a danger for the established knowledge, for
Well,
whatever.
he would be the first advocate to get rid of the apostasy laws.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he was killed by his state, and the charge was you are like causing the children to doubt God.
Yeah, that's
so I mentioned next obstacle and constraint. So I learned this from Ellie Goldratt, which really I learned from chemistry class. But Ellie Goldratt is the one that helped me realize that it's an idea that applies everywhere in knowledge rather than just a few areas in chemistry class or physics even. If you think of whatever question, Socratic question you start with, whatever issue you're trying to deal with, like I guess we should do an example, is there a God? And you have a discussion between two people, or let's say one of them is the teacher, and then the other one is the one that's trying to get some help. There's generally one area, one thing that is the constraint or the obstacle preventing the person from seeing the better or newer paradigm. And part of the Socratic method is to help that person by asking them questions that leads to them exposing the issue. What is the constraint? And by the way, that's what I've been doing with the two people that I helped in the last 2 episodes. I'm doing the Socratic method to help them expose their main problem. It's the constraint that's holding up their other issues, or the obstacle holding up all their other issues. Another way I call it is the core conflict. That's a word that Ellie Goldratt uses when he's talking about conflict resolution.
Yeah.
The core conflict. One more thing to say about this is, and we kind of said this before already. We were talking about how the two kinds of people, one group, I think my answers are pretty good, but I'm doubting them and I'm looking for better answers. And I also think that maybe my questions aren't great and I'll find better questions leading me to other answers. And the other side is, I already have the answers. I don't need to search. And yeah, my questions are great. Oh, they don't even think about questions. They just think of answers. They don't even say the word answers. They just say ideas. But of course, all ideas are answers to questions. And here's the point now. This is something I kind of learned in school. And I remember hearing about it from people like Einstein. Instead of memorizing answers, I would rather try to, if I'm going to memorize something, instead of memorizing answers, memorize questions, because you can regenerate the answer. If you only memorize answers and you don't even know what questions they're attached to, you can't update them. They're just hanging by themselves. They're not connected to any other knowledge in your head. Do you have anything to say about that before we move on?
There's probably a set of general principles. If I want to think about this from the point of view of something like physics, where knowledge can be derivable in a kind of a logical way, but this is something much more direct and simpler in a way in terms of decision making than everyday life experience, where you have really complicated questions that have so many different aspects. But I think if you are in the process of re-examining the set of ideas that you have, the questions themselves are going to be so lingering, so ever present in your mind that you are always looking for answers. So I think this process of transitioning is definitely something that is characterized by these questions. And I think that if we learn how to ask these questions properly and try to seek answers in those unbiased ways, then definitely that's going to make the process a lot more easier than thinking, oh, there is a well-defined answer to this, and I'm going to be seeking it because that's how I grew up. I grew up thinking that you have some knowledge that is given down to you by the authority figures, and I'm not going to be doubting it. Doubt is actually
a lot of people have this other problem where they think their question is stupid, which is like saying they're even doubting that their question is valuable.
Yeah.
But it was a good question. And even if it wasn't a good question in the sense that it's a good question universally for everyone, it's a good question for you because you need the fucking answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
or at least you need to know why it's a bad question, which is still, it's a good question until you have that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it depends on the type of question. If it's a kind of a question about something inconsequential, then one should definitely point out why this is not a good question. And although I'm actually a little bit hesitant to say that there is such a thing as a bad question. If the question came up, it means that it's something that can be answered or addressed in some way.
Right. And here's another way to say it. Even if it was a bad question, the way you get to a better question is to evolve it. There was something good in it, something you cared about in it, and you can make another question that is trying to get at the same thing, worded differently or whatever, different angle. But that good question came from the bad question, which means the bad question wasn't a bad question. It was a good question.
Yeah, and whatever question that is being asked, if for example I have a certain amount of knowledge in a given field and someone asks a question and I think that, well, this question is ill-formed or asking about something very simple or has some kind of a contradiction, obviously if I have that level of knowledge or understanding of the topic and I want to convey that knowledge to the other person or help them discover it for themselves, branding the question as a bad question is a non-starter. It's basically just
right. Oh, that's another way. Yes. Remember what I said was, like, imagine a good question that's good for universally everyone. I was trying to say it depends on each person. I'm asking different questions than somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
What's important in an important question in my worldview might not be an important question in another worldview. Yes. We're 48 minutes in. We're done with half the bullet points. So let's see how this goes. So knowledge evolves. I don't know if that's been obvious from what we've been saying. Knowledge evolves. We've used words like progress. It evolves in the same way genetic knowledge evolves. So I wrote here, mimetic evolution works similar logic as genetic evolution. In genetic evolution, you have new gene variants being made, meaning slight changes from old ones. And then you have gene variants being ruled out and taken out of the gene pool, when somebody dies before they have kids. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, you have new meme variants, which are slight changes from older memes. It means you cannot make an idea from scratch. That is literally impossible. In the same way, you can't make a gene. No gene is made from scratch, unless you're talking about the first one. But that's
well, no, it was made from scratch.
So there's no gene from scratch. Is my point. It's only a mutation from an older one. And I'd rather not get into the biology of it, of genetics, but and then the second step of ruling out a gene in the meme case, there's kind of two ways. One is like the rational way, the scientific way. First the idea ends up in the marketplace of ideas. Lots of scientists are judging it, and then they do experiments, they do some peer review, and then the idea is the bad theory, or the theory that loses to the better one. Like in this case, Newton's gravity theory lost to Einstein's gravity theory through this rational process of dialogue, right? And the other bad way is, well, it's done by force. Like the death penalty for apostasy. You kill the people that have the brains, that have the ideas in their heads.
Yeah, but in this case, it's really near impossible to kill that idea, or rather to exterminate it. If we want to think about the life
It's in lots of
analogy.
people's heads.
Because what's happening is that you are removing the individuals who are instantiations of that particular meme, the same way that you are removing individuals who might be carrying a certain gene that carries certain possible traits that can be manifested in individuals. And so my point here is that when you're looking at apostasy, the source for apostasy is always going to be present, which is like saying that you're removing the H2O molecules, but not removing the H2 molecules or the O2 molecules from the environment. These components are basically Islam itself, and the clash that Islam has with modern science, modern world, lifestyles that have some issues. So even if all the apostates were magically removed from the Muslim society, you still actually have the potential of producing new ones, simply because the environment that generated that meme in the first place is still there, and it's that beginning from some environment is always there.
Yeah, well, their methodology was more effective when, there wasn't internet yet, there wasn't the printing press yet. It was hard to travel far away. They can control a city, they can control a country. Now it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. What happens then is, if you want to make an analogy with genes, is that if you look at our genetic code, you will find that you have so many genes that don't get expressed at a given time, or that never get expressed at all in a given organism. And so
memes do that too.
Yeah, so it's not that the meme wasn't there, it's just that it wasn't being expressed in the public sphere where ideas get.
So let's do an example for people. Suppose a little boy watched 1,000 times his father beat his mother, and then during that time, that little boy is not beating anyone, but he may be learning to do that, and then in the future he has a wife, and the meme can come out of being dormant. Yeah. And he'll beat his wife. And that's how this happens every generation. Now, of course, it can go the other way. Somebody could also turn around and say, no, I don't like beatings, and I'm going to do it a different way. But that means other memes are competing and winning over that meme.
Yeah. Yes.
Actually, I want to talk about that a little bit after this section about epistemology. I want to talk about a new thing that wasn't planned in any of this. I want to talk about it because it came up in both of the helping episodes, and it was a big issue in my life. It is the idea that punishment is evil. Mm-hmm. And apparently, I didn't even connect these till yesterday. I chose, as the main flag of this organization, to get rid of like one of the worst forms of punishment, death penalty for apostasy. So punishment is important. And it's a bunch of ideas that people have in their heads that are propping up the idea that punishment is good. And that's what I want to talk about, but not right now. And I should say, Karl Popper is the one who discovered this, that mimetic evolution works by similar logic to genetic evolution. I say similar, it's almost the same. There's differences, so you can't say it's the same.
Yeah, anyway. I don't know if actually Popper employed the term meme as such.
Oh, he didn't.
Yeah.
But he figured out the logic.
Yeah, okay.
The guy who came up with the word meme was Richard Dawkins.
It was Dawkins in the Selfish Gene, I believe.
Yeah, the Selfish Gene.
And it's a contested idea in the circles where people view evolution of various cultural constructs, but it's so basic and so common sense that it's really hard to say that it's wrong. Though some people might use it in under different guises without really realizing that what they're actually doing is mimetic theory.
Well, let me add one more thing then. David Deutsch built onto this, and he discovered two methodologies that memes use to replicate. And then he names the two types of memes that are using the two strategies: static memes and dynamic memes. And another way to say them is rational and irrational. I think I swapped them there. Or he also uses the term anti-rational sometimes. Static memes, well, let me give the better one first. Dynamic memes replicate by being useful to the hosts, so that the hosts willingly use them and then teach them to their kids. And then people keep spreading them to others. Static memes have a different approach, an opposing approach. They're not useful to the host. That's not how they spread. They're being useful to themselves by hijacking the critical mind of the person and doing things like make you fear hell so you don't change your mind. Like, that's an extreme version of it. So, and then ideas can be mixed. So there's some dynamic meme-ness in it and some static memes in it.
If I don't know about this aspect in from what Deutsch might be saying, but if I want to think about the analogy between genes and memes as just a kind of a mindless, selfish, self-replicating mechanism, then the implications of it being beneficial or not beneficial comes afterwards, and it's not something that's built into the meme itself, if that makes sense. That if you have a gene that gives you the propensity for developing a certain kind of cancer at one point, this is not something because cancer is trying to self-preserve. It's just that particular gene is there because it was there.
Well, we could do examples like the wheel is a dynamic meme. We keep spreading it because we like it, we want it, we keep making it better. Islam is a static meme or memeplex, multiple ideas. There's some goodness in it. There has to be some, right? Because on both sides it's mixed. There's nothing that's purely dynamic meme, I think, and nothing that's purely static meme.
Well, I don't know. I have some ideas that come from Dennett, but maybe we can move on and then we can have some discussion of that at some later point.
At some other day, we could talk about this in particular. Yeah. I'd like to know what Daniel Dennett says about this.
Yeah.
Next one, the role of criticism. Karl Popper explains epistemology like this. Evolution of knowledge is this way: guesses and criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, meme generation and then ruling out memes. It's the same two things. That's the point of an experiment. The point of an experiment is to falsify a theory. Falsification is, the concept that you can even falsify something. And by the way, there are things that are impossible or difficult to falsify in the sense that they don't even make any predictions. Jinn is a version of that. Yeah. Jinn or demons, they don't make any specific predictions that you can rule out, so they're not falsifiable. Now, what does that mean we should do? It doesn't mean that science can't apply to it. It means science already applied to it and it's wrong.
Well, if you can think about actually how this happened, so the original theory that people had of the world, whether it's one that's involving a god or demons or whatever kind of explanation that people had at the beginning of something that's happening in the world, what happens is then you have scientific progress that does away with that particular idea. But then the cultural progress that is supposed to be paralleling this scientific progress is actually not keeping up. And so you
It's
end
much
up with a
slower.
kind of you end up with a hybrid view of things where people might say, well, the clouds, when you hear thunder, it's actually not that angel that's pushing the clouds, which is what Islamic mythology talks about, but it's rather certain phenomena in the atmosphere that can be understood in terms of that and that. But at the same time, the person who understands exactly how the scientific explanation works for this particular phenomenon would say, well, that doesn't prevent an angel from being there. If you think about it, okay, well, what is that angel actually doing if you have already explained the phenomenon? They're
It's the
saying
God of the
that
gaps method.
it's not even God of the gaps. We're talking about what can be considered an epiphenomenon. An epiphenomenon, one that accompanies the phenomenon itself, but doesn't actually necessarily have anything to do with it. It's just there.
So David Deutsch explains, and that's not one of my principles here, but maybe it should be, right? That a theory needs to be hard to vary. He says this in his book, The Beginning of Infinity. It needs to be hard to vary rather than easy to vary. And this thing you're saying, it's very easy to vary. You could change it to 1,000 other things and it won't break the theory. Well, that means it's useless.
Yeah, the term in this
Imagine
case.
you have a car. Imagine you have a car, or imagine you buy some piece of furniture in a kit form, and then you build it, and at the end there's 50 parts you didn't put in there. And if you say, well, oh, it's probably not needed, they weren't, or if you say the other way around, it was needed, and dude, you just made a dangerous thing. You better take it all apart and start over. I think it's the second way. Take it all apart and start over.
Yeah. If the theory is robust, it should be once you're able to arrive at a theory that is stable enough, it should be robust, and that's the stability that would be expected from a theory that can survive.
Well, and that's another way of saying every piece, every component within your theory needs to have good reasoning for why it's there. It can't be arbitrary.
Yes.
So, the role of tradition. I'm going to start by saying there's a thing I noticed in Western culture of hating the old, hating tradition. I succumbed to it. It made me disrespect my parents' knowledge. I think if I didn't have that problem, I would have been able to extract the good knowledge from my parents instead of, much later realizing, now I'm a lot better at when, trying to sift through what my parents are saying to figure out what's good in there, as opposed to, like, suppose they say something wrong in what they're saying. That doesn't mean everything they just said is wrong. Yeah. There's some good in there. And one reason to think there might be good in there, it's old knowledge. It's a lot of people worked on it. A lot of people criticized it. Now, maybe they're not criticizing as well as me, but they did a lot more of it. Some of these traditions are 1,000 years old. So it's 1 million people. Imagine 1 million of your ancestors. It's not 1 million, but thousands of people before you built on this idea and made it good. And now on the extreme other side of it, if I say, I just made up an idea 2 seconds ago, and I think it's better than the tradition that it's competing with, I think that's batshit crazy. Even if it was 10 minutes ago, So, there's this phrase I use all the time. Everyone uses it. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So even when you disagree with the tradition, don't throw out the good parts that are in there. There are good parts. Similarly, what we were saying earlier about, genes and memes, when you have a new gene variant, okay. When you rule out a gene or a meme, when you rule out a theory, it doesn't mean all of it was wrong. You can try to change the flawed component and make a new theory, a new version.
How does that apply in the case of religion? What are we? If you think about it, religion is supposed to be a monolithic body of knowledge. So it's hard to break it apart and say, I'm going to be keeping this and throwing this out. But at the same time, there are people who do attempt that. They would say, well, ethics seem to be derived from religion, and therefore we're going to be fostering that. We are secular, but the Ten Commandments sound like they are a good way to live by. If assuming,
well, I'll be clear. When people switch from Islam to Christianity, they are doing a version of that. First of all, Christianity and Islam have the same origins. They evolved from the same lines. Of course, they took different turns, but much of their history is the same. So for somebody that was a Muslim and now they're going to go to Christianity, they're doing some of that already. They're keeping a bunch of it, changing some of it. That's partly why it is very difficult to be an atheist, because you don't already have a system that you can just adopt. Although that's incorrect to say. There are systems you can adopt. The beginning of infinity is such a system, but not many people know about it compared to the number of people that know about Christianity.
Yeah. Leaving a kind of a religion and either going out without a religion or going to a different religion is definitely going to involve an attempt to keep some of what you already have. It's really hard to just leave everything behind and start anew, because after all, you're also talking about your identity. You're not just taking out a bunch of ideas and throwing them out and saying, okay, I've gotten rid of that particular religion. You're actually trying to actively re-examine who you are, and that re-examination is the difficult part.
Let's separate questions and answers for the moment, okay? Religion is a set of questions and a set of answers to them. And, the thing I just said was the way you come up with a new idea is, even when you find out the old idea is wrong, keep most of it, change one thing. The parts that you keep could be the questions themselves rather than the answers to them. So Islam says some sort of, let's just say religions in general say that, the God question is important. We should try to answer it. Well, and so when you were a Muslim and now you're not, maybe they still want an answer to that question. The question is still important. So they go seek out the answer. In their new worldview, that question is still important. In my worldview now, that question is not even important. Because it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't change anything about what we should be doing. Morality is the main issue.
Yeah.
Another way to say this is the way Eli Goldratt says it. And this is, instead of seeing it as particular traditions or ideas, it's certain people that have them. And what you find is, when we have improvements in our traditions, in our ideas, it's the best people that are doing it. They're the ones leading the pack. And then the question is, how do we learn from them and surpass them? Well, the only way you're going to surpass them is to learn from them and understand their ideas better than they do. So when Einstein came up with his theory of gravity, general relativity, it was because he understood Newton's gravity and Maxwell's electromagnetism better than they did, and better than everyone else in their time, and better than everyone in his time. Now, today, maybe people understand all that better than Einstein even, right?
I would definitely say that many people have. Let me give you a concrete example. So when Einstein put forth, actually two examples, when he put forth the theory of relativity, I don't want to go into a lot of details, but I just want to give the two examples quickly. He put something that was called the cosmological constant, because in his conception, the universe was stable, and then called it the biggest blunder of his life, because it turned out later on that the universe was actually expanding. It was dynamic. That's the results of Hubble. So Einstein did have an understanding, but he lacked some of the empirical knowledge. Another big example was that he didn't expect that his equations are easily solvable. And yet, Schwarzschild was the first one who actually to come up with a solution, and that was a black hole solution for his equations. And he surprised.
Did he come up with this solution from some math he was using that Einstein didn't understand?
No, it was the same math. It was just that it didn't come across Einstein's mind that this was a particular solution. He came up with the structure, but the actual solution.
He understood the math problem, but didn't know how to solve it.
Yeah, but also when we talk about relativity, we think that it's Einstein. He sat by himself working on this, but it was actually a host of other people as well,
including mathematicians, especially.
Yeah, most important of whom is Minkowski, his teacher.
Oh, okay. Okay, next one. I think we'll be able to finish, at least my slides. Modeling. When physicists are making up theories, you know, there's a like a methodology that they have for making the model. And this is true of all scientific fields. You always, you know, even the computer model thing that I said earlier, that's the same word, model. And I think it would help people if they learned some of that, some of how to build theories, you know. One highlight I'd like to make is Isaac Newton described, you know, there's people that call themselves systems thinkers. I think Newton was the first systems thinker. At least what he wrote was the first. I don't know what was said before that. I found out he actually sort of didn't give credit to certain people he learned shit from. So who knows where this one came from. But if it's him, it's fucking amazing. I think this is more important than anything else he did, by the way. He's seeing things as systems with parts in them, and there's a bunch of logic that he figured out of how to understand systems. And he put them on, if you can imagine a scale with an x-axis, and if you think of one metric, the number of interdependencies between the parts, the number of causal relationships between the parts. As the number goes up, well, let's start from the other end. No connections, no cause and effect between the parts, no dependencies between the parts. If you imagine that system, well, first of all, he said that doesn't exist in reality. There's no system in real life that has parts that don't depend on each other. And now I want to say a sentence everyone's heard a million times. The sum is more than the whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? That's not this system, though. This system, the whole is equal to the sum of the parts, because there's no way to, well, how do I say it? In a system where there are dependencies, there's a way to have a multiplying effect. So the whole will be more than the sum of its parts because there's a multiplying effect happening when they work together. Now, on the extreme end of this scale, the other end, you have so many interdependencies, it reaches a limit, it reaches an end point where there's one lever, one thing that you can pull that will control the entire system. And where I learned this, the first time that I learned it in a not general form, not like this, was in chemistry class. And they're teaching us about how some chemistry works, a chemical reaction, a particular one. It has, let's say, two reactants, and it has two products. And let's say you need one of part A and two of part B to make the products that you want. And let's say you happen to have 1 million of part A and not quite 2 million of part B. Now, if you're going to run this through a chemical reaction and use up all the parts you have, you will have some left over. If anyone's following the math, you will have some left over of part A. I think I said that right. Did you follow what I said?
One of them, the one that has a fewer is
yes.
going. Yeah.
And that's the limiting factor. That's going to control how much product you get. The other one doesn't have any control. That's a very simple scenario, but this logic applies to big scenarios, even with people, even with politics, even with economics. And let's see, it maybe I shouldn't have put it here. To me, it's it applies everywhere, but just looking at it here, it's not so clear how it applies anywhere. I don't know if I helped anyone make sense of this or why it's important. Did it make sense to you? Why, or does this feel like I put it in out of love of it instead of logic?
Possibly, but I mean, it's not out of place completely, but it's maybe that's why it ended up being number 8 and not number 1.
You know, another one that I love that I wouldn't put in something like this as a top 8 or top 10, the concept of degrees of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I see that in so many places. I remember one time I was playing a game. It was these balls attached with string in the middle. So 2 balls with string in the middle, and you were to throw it and hope that this contraption ball with string latches on to this device, and you're doing it from far. And you know, there's a level 1, level 2, level 3, different point levels. And I used the degrees of freedom concept in that game, and I was beating everybody. Because I thought the way I'm holding the ball, well, I don't want to teach it now because I didn't explain it, but this is really only to physicists. I'm sorry. The ideas I put here, I chose them because I found them to be more universal than everything else. They apply everywhere more than everything else does, in my view. Maybe you'll catch some stuff. Maybe in your slides you have, you know, some stuff.
I mean, like we said at the beginning, because of the fact that the theory of knowledge is scattered in all sorts of different disciplines, you don't actually have a well unified way of, like, I'm going to the university to get a degree in the theory of knowledge. It's not something that you do because you don't have that kind of disciplinary way of thinking about it, because it involves all sorts of things. It has it might be falling under the umbrella of cognitive science, which is actually a kind of a broad umbrella.
I'd like to clarify for people what I think you're saying. If you were in a philosophy department, and by the way, I was never in a philosophy university department. I was in the physics department. I didn't even take a philosophy class. The philosophy I learned was after I left Islam, from reading books by people like David Deutsch, Karl Popper, Socrates, these people, even Einstein. Although I read Einstein's book, you know, in my 20s or earlier than that, you know, because of college. What was I saying? I forgot what I was saying. Do you remember?
I'm not entirely sure. No.
Well, I'm glad we finished this. I was afraid that that we would finish 90% of it, and then the next 10% wouldn't fit anywhere. I think what we should do for the next episode is go through yours. What do you think?
That's possible. Given that we have covered some of what I was going to cover, maybe I'm going to make some modifications.
Oh, good. And send it to me. I'd like to look at it.
Sure.
After that episode, I want to do, it's probably going to be one episode covering. Actually, wait. Let me see if we should go through our banners first. Yeah. I'm gonna say this next. So, if you like this, everyone, like, subscribe, and share. If you want to suggest topics or call in, there's a link that's in the description, or 2 links, one for each of those things. And just to let everyone know, because I keep forgetting to tell people, we have a Discord. It's for socializing. It's for making friends. It's for, like, right now, there's a channel about cooking where I talk about cooking sometimes. If you're into cooking, come talk to me about that. If you want help deconstructing from Islam, you can get help there. There's going to be a lot of people there that you can ask questions to.
In the cooking channel?
Not in that one. Okay, so next week on Deconstructing Islam, it's going to be part 6. We're going to talk about, we're going to be talking about epistemology further, based on Usama's slides. And then part, I don't know why I'm jumping ahead now, but I think it's worth it. The next episode after that is going to be, I think, one episode explaining how to do journaling. And then the second half of that episode, how to get therapy, how to be a therapy patient, how to talk to the therapist, how to even select a therapist, how to recognize when there's a cheating therapist, because there's the gay therapy and the atheist therapy. And then, how to talk to how to see the whole thing, how to make it easier to even want to go get therapy. I think there's a level of skill people need to have to even be a good therapy patient, to even get motivated to do it in the first place, and then to do well while you're in it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess it's time to do some housekeeping. Let's see. Yeah, let's do it this way, though. So somebody says, God bless this channel. People need to wake up and leave Islam, be free, be whatever you want to be, free. This was in reply to the episode with it was the second one that I was helping an ex-Muslim. She presented with, she feels like a sinner.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the good stuff. Here's one more good one. Oh, this is her. She said, that's me you're talking about. And she said, much appreciated. She said, this massively helped.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And now for something negative. You're just an attention-seeking, slimy slug, worthless brain rot. So I turned on my anti-trolling hat and I said, why are you telling me? And she didn't reply. I don't know why I'm saying she. Could be he. They didn't reply. But I want to tell people why I chose this question, because if they answered honestly, it would make them look bad. If they answered dishonestly, well, I'll be able to catch the dishonesty, because like I said earlier in this episode, that would be a contradiction and I can find the contradiction. And if they keep talking to me, even though they're trolling and they think they're insulting me, I'm exposing their evil. They don't know that. Oh, the other thing that happens or can happen, I'm also trying to get them to change to the good side. If they stop trolling in the end, now they're on my side. I've done that with people. Actually, I want to give an example. I don't know if I told you this. A few years ago, when I was doing my research on trolling, I was talking in a lot of subreddits, and I was cataloging all these trolling that people were doing to me. And one of them was far worse than all the other ones. I call him the super troll. And at the end, he said, he admitted, your post was good, and I apologize.
Well, that means that whatever it is that was in the post actually hit so hard that the visceral reaction that they ended up having was so irrational that they couldn't actually muster something sane or cogent to say.
Well, he was trolling me for like 2 days. We went back and forth a lot of times. And like I said, all the other trolls, they would do maybe a one hit and run or 3, and they try 3, but they realize they're not winning and they give up. This guy went for 2 days. I don't know how many messages back and forth. I wasn't giving up. He wasn't giving up. And then he didn't ghost me. He said, your post was good and I apologize.
Nice.
I think people should go look into that. You should learn how to do it. That we need more people doing that, by the way. There's more trolls than there are good guys.
I don't know if the trolls versus good guys is the correct or.
Well, it's not. Remember, I turned him good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was something potentially going on there in the first place. Otherwise,
oh, I did it in the Joe Rogan subreddit. That's the potential thing.
Okay.
That whole place there's a culture of trolling for fun too, by the way. There was some people trolling me and it was a fun way and I was enjoying it. I was replying like, wow, that was a good one. You know, like that's part of the culture, but maybe he started that way, but he was also being the real troll, the not really doing it with you, fun troll, but wanting you to quit and shame you and, bully you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I understand.
All right. Well, that's all I have now. That's all we have. Does anyone? There's a couple people here. Does anyone have a question? Anyone have a question at all? Nobody. How about you, Sama? Do you want to say anything to the audience?
Well, I'm glad that I was able to do this. This was actually really a fun episode. I'm not sure if many people were able to extract some practical information about what they could be doing, especially if they were hoping for practical results. But I think that understanding the underlying ideas is also important, because if you're just seeking to get some ideas to implement in your life and not understanding what's underlying this, that's probably not going to take you far.
Well, let me say two things about that, about the practical thing. Your next episode could maybe deal more about the practical stuff. And then I'll say, I think there's a lot of practical stuff in what we said, because, like, as a tiny example, if you recognize this thing we're saying of, there's questions and answers, and every idea in your head, if it's just an answer to a question and you don't even know the question, it's not fully formed in your head, you should question that. And just having this logic now is practical in the sense that the next time you are in a scenario, ask yourself, do I know even what is the question that this idea is supposed to be answering? If you can't even write that down, you got a major issue there. So that's all. I guess we'll end here. And Osama, stay on for a second.
Okay.